Thank you. Thank you very much. I often get asked the question that why? Why would you decide to put the spotlight on women inventors and innovators? Why and how did you get started? It's a question that I'm always giving different answers to because and each answer has always been true, but I thought I'll just take you back a little bit so that you can join me in this journey for why I decided that this has to be the journey that I have to take in life. I happen to have been expecting my fourth child, and everyone would leave the house and leave me at home. My husband would go off to work and the children would go off to school. And in the morning I would say, well, what am I going to be doing? Because I'm just here twiddling my fingers. And on this very day, I decided that I was going to go off and spend some time at a museum or an exhibition. I looked at the local papers and I wanted a free one. I didn't want to have to pay for one, but I couldn't find one. The cheapest I could find was one which was the Inventors Fair, an international invention fair. Now, I had no idea what inventions were all about, except what I knew when I was growing up. They're usually scientists, white coats, a mad professor somewhere, or someone in the garden shed playing around with some gadgets. And I thought that, well, maybe I'll see how this goes. So I went into this international exhibition where there were loads of inventors. And what was incredible is that when you walk in, you don't really see anything that's that different. The diversity was there, both men and women, different gadgets, different high-tech, low technology. And as I walked around this exhibition in awe of all these new products, I would ask the first woman that I saw whether she had come up with this invention. And the look of horror in her face when she answered, me? Oh, of course not. That's my husband. He came up with it. Okay, great. Next booth. The same thing. Sorry, my brother. The next one, my husband, my partner, it just went on and on. And by the time I'd asked the sixth question, I was now determined. I was going to find one woman in this international invention fair that actually came up with an invention. Now, I have to tell you that this was 1998. Things are changing. And at that particular time, I don't know whether it was the pregnancy hormones or something of that sort, but whatever it was, I had to find this woman inventor. Now, sadly, it never happened. I walked around the whole International Invention Fair and I could not find one single woman inventor. And this was in London, in the UK. Now, what I did was to actually go straight away to the organizers. And the organizer was great because he just simply asked me to come in and sit down. Do you have any problems here? No, not quite, but I'm determined to find one woman inventor. Can you show me one? And he started laughing. He said, oh, for goodness sake, I've been running this invention fair for years. And only perhaps about 3% of the participants here have been women. Now, if you can find them, let me know. And that was it. I walked away and I couldn't help thinking all the way home, now there's something fundamentally wrong here. I just stumbled onto something. Where are the women inventors? By the time I got home, I'd worked myself up into a frenzy, I guess, because I was now on BBC Women's Hour, talking about what I had discovered, talking about whether there were women inventors out there, and if they are, please call because we want to find you and get you out of the woodworks. And the phone kept going and the fax kept going, and yes, they were coming out in all forms, but I just couldn't understand why they weren't participating. So that's how we began. Now, in terms of Africa, I didn't quite decide I was going to come to Africa straight away. The women who came out, we formed a network, we started to give ourselves support. We ended up in Asia. Now I can see my slides are going and I am not quite ready yet, but that was the first one that we did in Asia Pacific that brought together the whole world in terms of the women inventors. And it was amazing because if you look at the photograph at the bottom, It showed the different, I would say, regions that were represented there, from Asia to Africa to Europe, Australia. We had about 300 women who turned up for that very first global event that we had in Singapore. Before then, we had to find out what the reasons were. Why was it that the women were not coming together? So it couldn't just be a case of having a network and bringing ourselves out and saying, okay, here we are, we've got women inventors and innovators here. What are the issues here? Now, what we found was that the women were no different from the men. The men were also having problems with bringing out new ideas. I'll tell you in a moment what those issues were. But before then, I want to talk to you about how we eventually felt it was so necessary to come into Africa. Because when you have 300 women there, and then you suddenly look around and you see, well, okay, now we've got the women together, but there's only one African there. And I'm an African. So I have to do something about it. But how? I had quite a lot of support from the UK, from Europe, from Asia. How was I going to get into Africa and ensure that the women who were inventing were coming out? So one of the first things I decided to do was not to think about the costs, but just to see if I could start off by talking, going out there and talking in schools and universities. And people would come and listen to what I had to say. But the first thing I would ask is, can you name 3 women inventors? And then it would go silent. And I would say, okay, forget that. Name any African inventor that you know, whether it's a man or a woman. And it would go silent. And then I discovered that there weren't any history books that could actually pinpoint African inventors, whether they were men or women in Africa, written by Africans. So what were they teaching us in school? I knew women were inventing because by this time I'd started to find out that women invented the umbrella, the windscreen wiper, the matchbox, Kovlar, the bulletproof vest, and it went on and on. But why was I able to say that? Because they were almost all of them were Americans, and they were well documented with the year and the dates and everything. But in Africa, we didn't have such information. And the African inventors that were actually noted were also written by Americans. So I haven't got anything against America. In fact, I thought that was a good practice. But not to have any role models in this very crucial area of inventors, where inventors are the very people who have brought together every single thing that we're using today. Things that provide a proper quality of life for all of us, that create jobs. And yet, what I was seeing in front of me was a lack of acknowledgement or recognition or even awareness of any African inventor or innovator. And I remembered when I was in school, nobody ever spoke about it. So, what could we do about all of this? I found that something had to be done in order to bring out the tenacity and the commitment that these women inventors had. We had to sit together and find a way forward where people would actually support us, but I had to go with what I had. So I thought I would start from the UK. Now I have to say this very quickly because it wasn't just Africa. Anyone would think that the UK would be a lot better. But at that time, it wasn't. In fact, if I can remember earlier on when I said I had the idea, it was in the UK. So it wasn't a case that I was in Africa and there weren't any African women inventors. Even in the UK, there were not documents to show women inventors. And so, of course, the best thing I could do was to march off to the government offices and ask if they could help us out and do this and that. And I found out it didn't matter whether you were a woman inventor or not. As long as you were an inventor, they just didn't really want to know. Inventors happen to have had this stereotypical image. It wasn't one where people welcomed inventors. In fact, if you were an inventor, you were more likely to be seen as a fanatical, mad professor somewhere, someone who doesn't take no for an answer, someone who doesn't think like every other person, someone who's constantly thinking out of the box, never being able to just go along with other people. So, in other words, a troublemaker, a nuisance. Yet every single thing we were using were invented by someone who we completely disregarded. Now, I know this sounds really poor, but I'm actually telling you that this was one of the things that started to get me thinking even more and more about how we actually acknowledge and see inventors. So what were the answers? Traditionally, men have always been in the science, engineering, and technology field, and women were still catching up. And when you go to a lot of the inventors' fairs, many of them had high technology, not low technology. And in the first 2-3 years, a lot of the inventions that were coming out were actually low technology. I'd like to give you an example of Salome, a Ghanaian inventor, who came to see me and brought 2 scarves with her. And she said, I think I've got something here. And I said, have you protected it? He goes, oh, not really. I'm not even sure whether it's an invention or an innovation. And I said, what is it? And she showed me just 2 scarves. And I said, Africans have been wearing scarves for years. What's so inventive about this? Anyway, I sent her to our patent attorney, who came back and said, wow, there is something in this. And I just couldn't get it. In 2 scarves? But what Salome had invented was 2 scarves that you could wear in 25 different ways. And she could draw it, she could put it nicely in a way that you could easily understand. You could wear it in the evening, you could wear it during the day, you could wear it and feel really good. And the cost premium price is £300 a piece, 100% silk. It's being sold over the internet. It's being sold in high street shops today. I could easily have thought, oh goodness, no one's going to listen to that. But that was something that had commercial viability, and it was novel. And she got the patent for it. So there we go. It doesn't have to be high technology. Lots of kitchen appliances, children's baby wears, all of those things were flooding in. And I remember talking to a bank manager who said, but the problem with all of this is that women don't normally come up with things that we want to see, like high technology. I mean, we're in the world of high technology with iPods. And I said, but I think the question you should be asking is, does it have a social and an economic impact? Is it commercially viable? Is it going to provide a good quality of life for other people? Is it, at the end of the day, going to create jobs? And if you have an answer, yes, in all of those areas, why are we so bogged down in the sense that it has to be this way and that way? So I'm just going to finish off by just showing you a few slides of my photo album. Latin America, sitting together, just looking at how we could ensure that we put the spotlight on more women inventors. We celebrate our success, recognize when people have been able to achieve success, especially because we know that the road and the journey is full of pitfalls. When I was going to go to Africa, a few people called me and pulled me aside and said, women inventors in Africa, have you really thought about this carefully? African women are into trading and selling and buying. They're traders. They buy. In fact, they like to buy things from outside Africa. Hardly would they want to buy anything made in Africa. But I think that just taking that boldness and saying, well, we're going to go for it and see who turns up. And every seat was taken. I was so proud of my fellow sisters in Africa coming out from all over Africa to come to this very first conference of women inventors and innovators. And there we have Nella Kumafo there from Ghana, in the photograph where she was receiving an award from Richard Rankin of IFC World Bank. She just used to take plastic, waste plastic all over the place, and she would turn them into floor tiles for buildings. She created jobs. She created a better quality of life for other people. Tomilola Awoniyi from Nigeria came up with her own breakfast cereal when she couldn't afford to go out there and buy her own breakfast cereal off the shelves. She made it up, and she fed her children, gave it the right flavors, and was able to feed a whole family, including her own community, and made a big business out of it. That's when we were just looking at how she had developed the whole packaging again, having seen what is possible. Simi Bello, I'm deliberately choosing low technology, in fact, where there's no high technology at all, or science. Simi Bello, her wig is all over Europe, America, Africa, and she's really doing well. In order to be able to do a lot of what we do, we had to ensure that we had the expertise and the support and the people that can help us to move these products forward. People with knowledge in product development, design, marketing, intellectual property, science, knowledge transfer, access to finance, engineering, the whole lot. So I want to leave you with some good news. And that is that all of this, we're 10 years old, all of this hasn't been for nothing. The good news is we took on one part of that strand, and that was knowledge transfer. We knew access to finance was a key issue, but we knew we couldn't do very much in that area. So in the part of knowledge transfer, we decided that we would go into partnership with the university. We launched our very first Women Inventors platform at the European Parliament in February, and that was, cutting the ribbon at the European Parliament. And most recently, the building for our very first innovation center for women is going to be handed over to us in December of this year. Thank you very much for your time.